It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So said Yogi Berra long ago. Making predictions about the future would be a great skill because the world is changing around us and we need to take advantage of those changes or defend ourselves against the potential harm that could come to us because of those changes. The central theme of my work on repeatable genius is that the world is changing very quickly around us, and that innovation is both the cause of that and also a way to take advantage of that. I was recently in a conversation with somebody who took a different viewpoint, that the world is not really changing around us any faster than it ever has. And this is an idea that has some traction. There are many people throughout history who have said the world is changing faster than ever, and complained about it all the way since the time of Darwin and even before. Certainly it feels to me like the world is changing very quickly. You have Uber and Airbnb upending the cab and the hotel industries. You have Netflix that came in and upended the blockbusters of the world. You have the telcos that are trying to weather, again, Netflix coming in and other streaming services that make it so you don't really need cable in the home. Few people, when they move, will get a new landline. They'll just rely on their cell phone. So the old models, even advertising, the advertising dollars are leaving the cable world and they're going to the Amazons and the Googles and all the other social media platforms. Retail is being affected by Amazon. So it's hard to look anywhere and not see change. But again, it comes back to the idea, is the world changing faster than ever, or is change simply a constant? Certainly in history, there have been people who have been complaining about the pace of change in their own age. Plato complained that writing things down would addle our youth, the same way we look at kids today and say, if they can just Google everything, will they actually learn anything? Mark Twain has been quoted as complaining that everybody on earth should enjoy bliss and happiness except for the people who invented the telephone. He was so vexed by this new invention that kept interrupting him during his day. Looking back at this and how sometimes quaint these notions are that the world is so modern, it's crazy, that happened 50, 100, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, it can make us think that the complaints we hear today, or the observations rather, that the world is changing faster than ever are simply not true. It's just hyperbolic. I'm certainly not alone in thinking that the world is changing faster than ever. A simple Google search will show that. Almost every article that you'll come across says that that is true and warns of the consequences and advises us on what to do to deal with it. But is it really changing faster than ever? And what does that mean? When you talk about a rate of change, you're talking about a change of something over a unit of time. Well, what's that something? That's the challenge. And I think that's why the conversation I was having wasn't getting anywhere, because there's no equivocal way to say the whole world is changing and what speed it's changing. You can't plot that on a graph. You can plot many things on a graph that demonstrate change is faster than ever. The classic is Moore's law, the idea that semiconductors, the processors, chips, will get faster and faster exponentially and cheaper exponentially, and storage will do the same. Transmission speeds will do the same. And we do see that. That is definitely something we can plot. But does that change our lives exponentially? That's, I think, the fundamental question and the difficult question to wrestle with. McKinsey is a global consulting firm, and they've studied the impact of change on jobs, which is another important way, and a way you can actually plot on a graph how many people have to change jobs, how many people have to change industry. That's something that demonstrates the impact of change in our lives in a very visceral way. Your job, your livelihood is very important to everyone. What McKinsey found was that, with rare exceptions in the United States, in China, around the world, that as productivity went up, so did the rate of employment. So finding new technologies and better ways of doing things has historically, just about every time, not only improved our capability to make things, but also our capability to make a living. The explanation that McKinsey offers is that as productivity goes up, demand for goods goes up as well, and therefore we can all find a livelihood, even amidst robots or computers or artificial intelligence, whatever technologies are being brought to bear, we can still find work in that world. Nevertheless, I and many other people are unsettled by the question of, is it different this time? The technology that has been brought to bear in the last 100 or 200 years to improve our lives has largely replaced our need to exert physical labor. And so the machines are getting better and better at doing things we would have done with our hands, better and better at doing things that would have been repetitive work. The challenge is that now we face artificial intelligence, more nimble robots, all kinds of technologies that actually start to replace the work we used to think was uniquely human, which is thinking about things. And the question is, if the artificial intelligence starts to follow that curve of Moore's law and actually becomes smarter than us in any way, what are we going to do for a living then? This, of course, won't happen immediately, and it's also, because it could happen so suddenly, it's very hard to predict the future, as Yogi Berra said. But nevertheless, McKinsey has done some work to really break down and get into the details and see what changes are afoot for people. What McKinsey found in their 2017 report was that somewhere between 75 million and 375 million people will not only need to find new jobs, but new professions between then and 2030. So we're talking about 13 years. Admittedly, that's a wide range of between 75 million and 375 million. And it's easy to sort of say, well, 75 million compared to 7 billion, 8 billion people on the earth, maybe that's not such a big deal. Even 375 million over the course of 13 years, maybe that's not such a big deal. But when you think about the move from people working on the farm, where there were over 50% of the population in the United States, I think it was closer to 80%, working on the farms, and now it's down to maybe 5% working on the farms. But that change took place over 100 years. This change we're looking at will happen over less than a generation. And so can people reskill? Can people thrive when the work they used to be doing is completely replaced? And you can't, so for example, a cashier. If a cashier is replaced by a machine and that machine is cheaper and people accept it in the store, what's going to happen to that person who can no longer get a cashier job anywhere because there's a machine in every job like that? They'll have to reskill, but what can they reskill for? Ray Kurzweil is a famous futurist, and he has predicted many of the changes in our world over the last 30, 40 years quite accurately, mostly based on the idea of Moore's law, that there are technologies that change along a curve, and so you may say that something is impossible now, like Siri, for example. If you asked me 30 years ago, would it be possible to talk to your computer using natural language and have it respond to you? My answer would have been pretty certain that's just science fiction, but that's because I wasn't thinking through the impact of Moore's law, which says the processing power will go up exponentially. If I'd done that and thought through, well, exactly how much processing power would we need, I could have followed that line and predicted it. And this is what Ray Kurzweil is famous for. He makes some pretty striking predictions about what the future holds for us today, so going into the future 20, 40, 60 years into the future. And a lot of it really hinges on that curve around artificial intelligence. What will happen in the world when we have biotechnologies that start to really become computing technologies, and how fast will they be affected by that curve? Or artificial intelligence in the day-to-day world, what will it do for us, and therefore what will we no longer need to do for ourselves? Critics of Kurzweil's position take issue with his prediction that everything is exponential. In fact, Moore's law itself is in jeopardy of becoming logarithmic again. So some people are saying that often what appears to be an exponential curve can in fact become an S-curve. So for example, we look at the population of the human race. It's going up exponentially, but obviously there's going to be a limit, and at some point it's going to have to roll over, hopefully not come down, but certainly roll over and stop going up. And this is something that you see in adoption curves of technology, for example. There's only so many cars on Earth, so the transition from a carburetor to fuel injection is going to follow an S-curve. The adoption of the toaster in the home, there's only so many homes in the world, so you're going to get to 100% and it'll roll over near the top. What's striking is if you look at many of the graphs of adoption of technology, yes, it's true that maybe they roll over at the top, and so you don't have this constant stratospheric exponential curve, but you do see that the rate of change before it rolls over is that much faster. So the adoption of the TV took some time. The adoption of the radio took some time, but the adoption of the cell phone is almost straight up. And the things that we are changing are happening. It's almost like rings on a tree. They're coming closer and closer and closer, and things that change our daily lives. So part of the problem with this is that at any given moment, we can all make predictions, and as Yogi Berra says, they're really hard to make accurately. If you are sitting on a curve just before it goes exponential, you could easily argue that it's linear, that the little tick above the line is not significant until it starts to go straight up. You can also, depending on where you are on that line, say, oh, we're exponential, and then you notice it's starting to roll over at the top and we're back to logarithmic. I think the real challenge here is that when you're talking about real phenomena, not mathematical phenomena, they're not going to sit perfectly on a mathematical curve. And so this is why it is so hard to predict the future, because you can't mathematically model it with any certainty. William Gibson is a science fiction author, and he's been quoted as saying that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. This feels like a real thing. I mean, if you've been around the world, or if you even watch around the world on YouTube, you'll see that some people are being impacted by technology faster than others. A good example of that is the cell phone. The cell phone is being adopted in countries that previously had very little in the way of telecommunications, because it's a way of leapfrogging the need to install all that telecommunications. So they are immediately using cell phones in ways that we don't, and yet in other ways we live in a very modern world with skyscrapers and the like. So it's very hard to make predictions when you're only looking in one place. It's like you're trying to sample and it's not distributed evenly. So this makes it tricky to predict the future as well. I opened this video by asking the question, is the world changing faster than ever? And I have to come to the conclusion that it depends where you look, and it depends where you sit. What I can say with some certainty is that somewhere within McKinsey's range of 75 million to 375 million people are going to be affected by the changes around us. Whether that's faster than ever, I don't really know. But if one person loses their job due to technological change, for that person, it doesn't matter if it's faster than ever or not. If it happens to me, if it happens to you, it doesn't really matter where we are in a line, and if that line is going linear or exponential or rolling over at the top, it really doesn't matter. Innovation, of course, is the mechanism by which we adapt to a changing world. The techniques like lean startup, design thinking, growth hacking, agile, all of these processes are meant to adapt to a rapidly changing world. And they do this through very similar mechanisms, in my view. It's really about taking a small step with a theory behind it, and then seeing what happens with that small step. Does your theory get validated or not? And if it does, then you double down. If it doesn't, then you look for another theory. Thank you for joining me for this Repeatable Genius video. If you enjoyed it, please click like, and I hope you subscribe because I'd like to see you at the next one. Thank you.